"Stay away tonight. I'm bringing someone over and we need alone time." The text message appeared on my phone at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday, clinical and matter-of-fact, like Claire was scheduling a conference call rather than destroying our 8-year marriage. I stared at those words while sitting in my truck outside the Denver construction site where I'd spent the day managing a residential development project, and something fundamental shifted inside me. I typed back 2 words, "Sure thing." I drove straight to the Marriott downtown and booked a week-long stay, paying with my personal credit card while the desk clerk processed my reservation with professional courtesy. The room was clean, quiet, and mine alone, which felt strange after years of sharing every space with someone who'd gradually made me feel like an intruder in my own life. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, still holding my phone, and realized I wasn't angry or devastated like I probably should have been. I was relieved. Claire's message had finally given me permission to stop pretending our marriage was worth saving, and the brutal efficiency of her scheduling this betrayal felt perfectly representative of what we'd become. Looking back, I could trace the exact moment our relationship started its slow death spiral, though I hadn't recognized it at the time. Claire and I met during our junior year at Colorado State, where she was studying marketing and I was finishing my construction management degree. She was vibrant then, always planning weekend adventures and talking about the travel blog she wanted to start after graduation. I was the steady one, the guy who made sure we had backup plans and emergency funds, and she used to say my reliability made her feel secure enough to take risks. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I thought. Marriage came naturally after 3 years of dating, a small ceremony in her parents' backyard with promises about building something meaningful together. The transformation happened gradually, so subtly that I didn't notice Claire viewing me differently until it was already complete. Her entry-level position at a boutique advertising agency evolved into increasingly demanding roles as she climbed the corporate ladder, and my support of her ambitions somehow morphed from partnership into servitude. I handled the mortgage payments, grocery shopping, car maintenance, and household repairs while she focused on networking events and late-night strategy sessions. When she talked about work, her eyes lit up with passion and purpose, but when she looked at me, I saw the polite appreciation someone might show their accountant or handyman, functional but not particularly exciting. The name Derek started appearing in her conversations about 6 months ago, always accompanied by glowing descriptions of his innovative vision and creative brilliance. Derek was the new creative director at her agency, 28 years old with an MBA from Northwestern and ideas about revolutionizing their client approach. Claire would come home energized after working with him, full of stories about his strategic insights and design concepts, and I started feeling like a relic from her past rather than her partner in the present. She began asking me to leave the living room when she took work calls, claiming my presence was distracting, and our dinner conversations became updates about Derek's latest projects rather than discussions about our own lives. The warning signs accumulated like evidence in a court case I didn't want to prosecute. Claire started working later, taking weekend client calls, and volunteering for travel assignments that kept her away for days at a time. She bought new clothes with subtle sophistication, replaced her practical Honda with a leased BMW, and developed opinions about wine that required expensive tastings to properly appreciate. When I mentioned our anniversary dinner reservation, she sighed about being too busy with the Morrison account launch, but somehow found time for Derek's birthday celebration at that exclusive rooftop restaurant I couldn't afford on a project manager's salary. Her physical distance matched the emotional withdrawal, intimate moments becoming perfunctory obligations rather than expressions of connection. She started sleeping on her side of the bed like we were college roommates rather than married lovers, and conversations about our future became logistics about bill payments and household schedules. I tried planning date nights and weekend getaways, but Claire seemed impatient with my efforts, like I was forcing her to participate in activities beneath her evolving standards. The woman who once loved hiking and camping now preferred art gallery openings and networking dinners, and I felt increasingly out of place in her expanding social circle. The final insult came 3 weeks before her devastating text message, when Claire suggested I might be happier with someone more traditional, someone who appreciated my conventional approach to life and relationships. She framed it as concern for my fulfillment, but I understood she was really saying I wasn't sophisticated enough for her current trajectory. When I asked what she meant by traditional, she explained that I was the type of man who wanted a wife who cooked dinner and watched Netflix on weekends, while she needed someone who understood the demands of professional ambition and modern career goals. The irony wasn't lost on me that Claire's coldly efficient text message perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with our relationship. She'd scheduled her affair like a business meeting, treating our home like a conference room she could reserve for private consultations. There was no emotion in those words, no acknowledgement that she was dismantling 8 years of shared history with the same casual tone she'd used to reschedule lunch. The clinical precision of her betrayal felt worse than raw anger would have, because it revealed how completely I'd become a logistical inconvenience rather than someone whose feelings mattered. I thought about all the Thursday nights I'd spent alone recently while Claire worked late with Derek on urgent projects that required dinner meetings and weekend sessions. Her explanations had become elaborate, filled with marketing jargon that justified longer hours and deeper collaboration. I'd convinced myself that supporting her career ambitions was what good husbands did, even as I noticed her coming home energized in ways that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction. Sitting in that hotel room, I realized Claire's text message was actually mercy, brutal but honest communication that saved us both from months of pretending our marriage could survive her transition into someone who viewed me as an obstacle rather than a partner. She wanted space to explore whatever was happening with Derek, and I wanted dignity, which meant refusing to fight for someone who'd already decided I wasn't worth keeping. I ordered room service, turned on the television, and started planning my next moves with the methodical approach that Claire found so predictably boring but that would serve me well in the days ahead. I'm a construction project manager, 34 years old, the kind of guy who shows up early and stays late to make sure residential developments get built on schedule and within budget. My job requires practical problem solving and attention to detail, skills that served me well when Claire and I first started building our life together, but apparently made me predictable and boring as she evolved into someone who valued excitement over reliability. Claire is 31 now, a rising star at Morrison & Associates advertising agency, and somewhere along the way she started viewing my steady income and dependable nature as limitations rather than assets. The shift in our relationship dynamics happened so gradually that I didn't recognize it was happening until I'd already become her personal assistant instead of her husband. It started innocently enough during her first promotion 3 years ago, when she asked if I could handle more of the household logistics so she could focus on establishing herself at the agency. I took over the mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery shopping, and car maintenance, figuring this was temporary support while she found her professional footing. Claire was working 60-hour weeks and coming home exhausted, so I made dinner, did laundry, and handled the weekend errands that kept our suburban Denver home functioning smoothly. What I thought was partnership gradually became servitude as Claire's career ambitions expanded and her expectations of my role crystallized into something uncomfortably one-sided. She stopped asking if I could handle things and started assuming I would, treating my contributions like invisible infrastructure that simply maintained itself. When the dishwasher broke, I researched models and arranged installation. When her car needed new tires, I handled the appointment and payment. When we needed a vacation, I planned the itinerary and booked everything while she complained about the destinations being too predictable or the hotels lacking the sophistication her colleagues would expect. The introduction of Derek 6 months ago marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't understand the threat he represented until it was too late. Derek Williams was the new creative director at Morrison & Associates, 28 years old with an MBA from Northwestern and ideas about revolutionizing their approach to luxury brand marketing. Claire came home from his first week glowing with enthusiasm about his innovative vision and strategic brilliance, describing him with the kind of breathless admiration she used to reserve for her favorite professors or inspiring TED Talks. Derek became the standard against which she measured every other aspect of her professional life, and by extension, our personal one. She would describe his cutting-edge presentations and forward-thinking campaign concepts with genuine excitement, then look at me arranging our monthly budget spreadsheets with barely concealed disappointment. When Derek suggested the agency team needed to elevate their cultural sophistication to better serve high-end clients, Claire started attending art gallery openings and wine tastings, Events that somehow never included invitations for boring construction managers who talked about building codes and project timelines. The erosion of respect accelerated when Claire began treating my presence in our own home as an intrusion on her professional development. She started taking work calls in the living room, then asking me to leave because my presence was distracting to her concentration. When I pointed out that I lived there too, she explained that Derek and other colleagues might find it unprofessional to hear background noise during their strategic discussions. I ended up eating dinner alone most nights while Claire participated in conference calls that seemed to involve more laughter than actual business planning. Her physical transformation paralleled the emotional distance she was creating between us. Claire replaced her practical wardrobe with sophisticated outfits that required expensive accessories and regular trips to high-end salons. She traded her reliable Honda for a leased BMW because Derek had mentioned that image mattered when dealing with luxury clients, and she didn't want to appear unsuccessful when driving to meetings. The woman who once loved camping and hiking suddenly needed spa weekends and cultural experiences that expanded her aesthetic sensibilities and professional network. Our intimate life became another casualty of Claire's professional evolution, reduced to perfunctory encounters that felt more like scheduled maintenance than expressions of love. She approached our physical relationship with the same efficient detachment she used for household logistics, checking off obligations rather than connecting emotionally. When I tried to plan romantic evenings or weekend getaways, Claire seemed impatient with my efforts, like I was forcing her to participate in activities beneath her evolving standards and social aspirations. The final blow to my dignity came 3 weeks before her devastating text message, when Claire suggested we might be fundamentally incompatible because I was too conventional for her current trajectory. She framed this observation as concern for my happiness, explaining that I deserved someone who appreciated traditional relationship values and domestic stability, while she needed a partner who understood the demands of contemporary professional life and modern career goals. When I asked what she meant by traditional, Claire clarified that I was the type of man who wanted a wife who cooked dinner and watched Netflix on weekends, while she required someone who shared her appreciation for cultural sophistication and intellectual stimulation. The cruelest part was how Claire made my steady, reliable nature sound like character flaws rather than the foundation that had supported her professional growth for years. She talked about needing someone more dynamic and ambitious, someone who could match her energy and vision for their shared future. When she mentioned Derek's name in these conversations, praising his innovative thinking and cultural awareness, I finally understood that she wasn't just questioning our compatibility but actively comparing me to someone she found superior in every meaningful way. I had become the consolation prize in her life, the safe choice she was outgrowing as she discovered what she really wanted in a partner. The irony was that everything she now found limiting about me was exactly what had made her feel secure enough to pursue her career in the first place, but acknowledging that would have required gratitude she was no longer capable of feeling. Rather than driving home to confront Claire or calling to demand explanations, I spent that evening methodically planning my exit strategy with the same systematic approach I used for construction projects. My colleague Mike had gone through a messy divorce 2 years earlier, and his advice echoed in my mind as I sat in the hotel room making lists on the provided notepad. Mike had warned me that emotional responses led to tactical mistakes, and that the spouse who stayed calm and prepared usually came out ahead when marriages imploded. I wasn't interested in revenge, but I wanted to protect myself from being taken advantage of during what was clearly going to be an ugly dissolution of our partnership. The first step was securing my financial independence before Claire realized I was serious about ending our marriage. I knew she worked late every Thursday and that Derek often stayed for what she called strategy sessions, which gave me approximately 2 hours to handle banking and retrieve my belongings from our suburban Denver home. I drove to our bank Friday morning and legally withdrew exactly half of our joint savings and checking accounts, transferring the substantial sum to a personal account I opened at a different institution. The total was more significant than I'd expected, largely because I'd been the only one making regular deposits while Claire treated our shared finances like her personal expense account. Removing my name from joint credit cards and utility accounts took another hour of paperwork, but I wanted clean separation of our financial obligations before she could run up debts in my name or claim I was hiding assets. I'd learned enough from Mike's experience to know that documentation mattered more than fairness when relationships became legal battles, and I wasn't going to let Claire's inevitable claims of abandonment stick in court. My construction background had taught me the importance of proper planning and sequenced execution, skills that translated perfectly to dismantling a life I'd spent 8 years building with someone who no longer wanted me in it. The second phase involved retrieving my belongings while Claire was presumably entertaining Derek at our house, an operation that required precise timing and ruthless efficiency. I knew Claire's schedule better than she realized, including her habit of working late on Thursdays followed by dinner meetings that stretched past 9 o'clock. Derek's silver BMW would be parked in our driveway as usual, and they'd be too absorbed in their romantic evening to notice my truck pulling into the garage. I'd calculated exactly what belonged to me versus what we'd purchased together, focusing on items I could remove quickly without leaving obvious gaps that would alert Claire to my intentions. My clothes filled 3 large suitcases, along with personal items like photo albums from before our marriage, my tools from the garage workshop, and electronics I'd bought with my own money. The smart home system I'd installed throughout the house was technically mine since I'd researched, purchased, and configured every component during a weekend project Claire had found tediously domestic. I carefully removed the central hub, Wi-Fi mesh network, smart switches, and security cameras, leaving basic electrical fixtures that functioned normally but eliminated the technological sophistication that had made our house feel modern and convenient. My gaming setup disappeared from the basement along with the 75-inch television I'd bought for watching football, purchases Claire had tolerated but never appreciated. The high-end coffee machine vanished from the kitchen counter, along with the espresso grinder and premium beans I'd discovered during my brief attempt to become the kind of sophisticated husband Claire seemed to want. Even the streaming service devices disappeared from every television, since the accounts were registered in my name and paid through my credit card. I took the premium bedding set I'd purchased for our anniversary, the cast-iron cookware I'd researched obsessively before buying, and even the expensive knife set that had become essential to my weekend cooking routine. Everything I removed had been my individual purchase rather than a joint investment, but the cumulative effect would be devastating to the lifestyle Claire had grown accustomed to enjoying. The beautiful irony was that most of these items represented my attempts to become the kind of refined husband who could match her evolving tastes, purchases I'd made hoping to bridge the growing gap between us. Now they were coming with me to furnish whatever new life I was building without someone who'd stopped appreciating the effort behind every thoughtful gesture. I worked methodically through the house, checking my list twice and making sure nothing I took could be claimed as joint property during divorce proceedings. The wedding photos stayed on the walls, along with furniture we'd bought together and gifts from both families. I wasn't trying to punish Claire by leaving her with nothing, but I wasn't going to subsidize her affair by leaving behind everything that made our house comfortable and functional. My final act was removing the wireless mesh network that provided seamless internet coverage throughout our 2-story home, leaving Claire with only the basic router connection in the office upstairs. She'd grown dependent on having strong Wi-Fi signal everywhere for her endless work calls and video conferences, and discovering dead zones in the living room and bedroom would be an immediate reminder that convenience had a price she'd never bothered calculating. The systematic removal took exactly 90 minutes, with everything loaded into my truck and a small storage unit I'd rented that morning. I left my wedding ring on the granite kitchen counter next to a brief note explaining that I was giving her the privacy she'd requested and that my attorney would be contacting her soon about divorce proceedings. The note was professional and emotionless, matching the tone of her original text message that had started this entire process. As I drove away from our suburban neighborhood for what I knew would be the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete control over my own life and decisions. The satisfaction wasn't vindictive but practical, the relief of finally taking action instead of passively accepting disrespect. I'd spent too many months hoping Claire would remember why she'd fallen in love with me, waiting for her to appreciate what we'd built together, making excuses for unacceptable behavior. Her text message had finally given me permission to stop trying to save something that had been dying slowly for months, and my methodical response felt like the first honest thing either of us had done in our relationship for quite some time. Claire would return home expecting to find the same comfortable house she'd left that morning, subsidized by my income and maintained by my labor, ready to serve as backdrop for her romantic evening with Derek. Instead, she would discover the true cost of taking someone for granted. My systematic dismantling of our shared digital life required the same methodical approach I'd used for the physical removal, but with implications that would extend far beyond missing appliances and entertainment systems. I spent Saturday morning changing passwords for every account that bore my name, starting with streaming services and working through online banking, insurance portals, and subscription services that had made our house function seamlessly. Claire had grown dependent on the technological infrastructure I'd built and maintained, treating high-speed internet and smart home automation like utilities that simply existed rather than conveniences someone had researched, purchased, and configured for her benefit. The premium streaming packages disappeared from every television in the house, along with the music services that had provided soundtrack to her workout routines and dinner preparations. Cloud storage accounts that contained years of our photos and documents became inaccessible when I removed her sharing privileges, though I made sure to download anything that belonged to both of us before cutting off her access. Even our joint credit monitoring and financial planning applications lost her access when I changed the primary account holder information, leaving Claire without the tools she'd relied on to track spending and manage her increasingly expensive lifestyle. The high-end mesh Wi-Fi system I'd installed throughout our two-story house had been a weekend project from the previous summer, one of those domestic improvements Claire had found tediously practical but had grown to depend on completely. She worked from home frequently, participated in video conferences from every room, and streamed content to devices throughout the house without ever considering the technology that made such convenience possible. Removing the central hub and satellite nodes left her with only the basic internet connection in the upstairs office, creating dead zones in the living room, bedroom, and kitchen that would make her remote work schedule nearly impossible to maintain. I took particular satisfaction in disconnecting the smart home automation that had controlled lighting, temperature, and security throughout our house, systems that had taken me weeks to install and program but that Claire had learned to operate without understanding or appreciating the complexity involved. The smart doorbell, security cameras, automated locks, and climate control would no longer respond to voice commands or smartphone apps, reducing our technologically sophisticated house to basic functionality that required manual operation of every switch and device. My gaming setup had occupied most of the finished basement, a space Claire had grudgingly allowed me to claim as my own domain after years of compromising on shared areas throughout the rest of the house. The 75-inch television, gaming consoles, sound system, and comfortable furniture represented my one refuge from the increasingly tense atmosphere upstairs, but also thousands of dollars in electronics that were unquestionably mine to take. Claire had tolerated my gaming hobby the way she might tolerate a pet she found annoying but mostly harmless, occasionally making dismissive comments about grown men playing video games when they should be focused on more sophisticated pursuits. The space would now be empty except for the basic carpet and overhead lighting, a hollow reminder of interests she'd never shared or supported. The premium coffee setup I'd assembled in our kitchen represented months of research into brewing techniques and equipment, an attempt to master the kind of sophisticated morning routine that might appeal to Claire's evolving tastes. The espresso machine, precision grinder, digital scale, and temperature-controlled kettle had cost more than most people spent on kitchen appliances, but had produced the cafe-quality drinks Claire enjoyed without acknowledging the investment or effort required. She would wake up Monday morning expecting her usual perfectly crafted latte and discover only basic instant coffee and a standard drip machine that had been relegated to the pantry months earlier. My wedding ring felt surprisingly light when I placed it on the granite kitchen counter next to the brief note I'd prepared explaining my departure. The note was businesslike and emotionless, matching the tone of Claire's original text message that had started this process 24 hours earlier. I explained that I was giving her the privacy she'd requested and that my attorney would be contacting her soon about divorce proceedings, but offered no emotional appeals or opportunities for negotiation. The clinical language was intentional, designed to mirror the cold efficiency with which she'd scheduled her affair like a business meeting. I wanted Claire to understand that her matter-of-fact approach to destroying our marriage would be met with equally practical responses to the legal and financial consequences of her choices. The house felt different as I conducted my final walkthrough, checking for anything I might have forgotten while making sure nothing I'd taken could be claimed as joint property during divorce proceedings. 8 years of shared memories surrounded me in the form of furniture we'd chosen together, artwork we'd collected during vacations, and wedding photos that documented a happiness I now realized had been one-sided for longer than I'd wanted to admit. I left everything that belonged to both of us, focusing only on items I'd purchased independently or that were clearly personal belongings, but the cumulative effect of my removals would be devastating to the comfortable lifestyle Claire had grown accustomed to enjoying at my expense. The beautiful irony was that most of the items I'd taken represented my attempts to become the kind of sophisticated husband who could match Claire's evolving expectations, purchases made during my increasingly desperate efforts to bridge the growing gap between us. The smart home technology, premium appliances, and entertainment systems had been investments in our shared future that had instead become tools of my liberation from someone who'd stopped appreciating the thoughtfulness behind every upgrade and improvement. As I locked the door and drove away from our suburban neighborhood, I knew Claire would return that evening expecting to find the same house she'd left that morning, ready to serve as the comfortable backdrop for whatever romantic plans she'd made with Derek. Instead, she would discover a technological wasteland that made the expensive furniture feel like stage props in an empty theater, beautiful to look at but stripped of the functionality that had made our house feel like a modern home worth living in. I was enjoying room service and cable television in my hotel suite when my silenced phone began lighting up with incoming calls around 8:30 that evening, the glowing screen creating a rhythm of desperation that provided better entertainment than anything on television. Claire's discovery of my systematic departure was playing out exactly as I'd anticipated, and I watched each notification appear with the detached curiosity of someone observing a scientific experiment rather than the dissolution of an 8-year marriage. The first calls came rapidly, one after another with barely enough time between attempts for her to leave voicemails, and I could picture her standing in our hollowed-out house trying to process the scope of what I'd removed and what it meant for her immediate future. I had no intention of answering, but the escalating pattern of her communications told a story that was both predictable and satisfying in its demonstration of consequences finally catching up with choices. The text messages that followed the unanswered calls revealed Claire's emotional progression from anger to panic as she realized this wasn't a temporary tantrum but a permanent separation executed with legal precision. Her initial messages were demanding and accusatory, asking what I thought I was doing and insisting that I return immediately to discuss our problems like mature adults. The irony of her wanting mature discussion after scheduling an affair via text message wasn't lost on me, but I watched her digital meltdown with the same professional detachment I used when analyzing construction project failures. When demands for immediate explanations failed to generate responses, her messages shifted to increasingly frantic attempts to understand the financial implications of my withdrawal from our joint accounts and what it meant for her ability to maintain the expensive lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to enjoying. She discovered the bank account changes when she tried to order dinner delivery and her card was declined, then realized the scope of my financial independence when she checked our online banking and found half our savings missing. Her messages became longer and more desperate as she calculated how quickly her individual income would cover the mortgage, car payment, credit card bills, and discretionary spending that had defined her identity for the past few years. The expensive BMW lease, designer clothing budget, and frequent spa treatments suddenly became impossible luxuries rather than basic necessities, and I could sense her growing panic through the increasingly emotional language of her text messages. Derek's hasty departure from what was supposed to be their romantic evening became apparent when Claire's messages shifted from anger at my actions to humiliation about her situation becoming public knowledge. Her sophisticated creative director had presumably expected a discreet affair with a married woman, not to be thrust into the middle of an active divorce situation with financial complications and legal ramifications. The man who'd seemed so confident and innovative when discussing marketing strategies apparently had less enthusiasm for dealing with the messy reality of broken marriages and emotional drama. Claire's messages revealed that Derek had made excuses about needing to prepare for Monday meetings and left her alone in our echoing house to deal with the consequences of choices they'd made together but that only she would have to live with permanently. I found myself genuinely curious about how Derek was processing his role in destroying someone else's marriage and whether he'd expected Claire to handle the transition more smoothly than she obviously was managing. The romantic evening they'd planned had become an uncomfortable confrontation with reality, and Derek's retreat suggested he preferred his affairs to remain fantasy rather than dealing with the practical implications of his actions. My attorney had been recommended by the legal team that handled my construction company's contracts, and I'd called him Friday evening to explain the situation and request immediate action. He'd worked through the weekend to prepare divorce papers using Claire's own text message as primary evidence of abandonment and infidelity, along with documentation of the financial separation I'd executed to protect my assets. Colorado's no-fault divorce laws would make the process relatively straightforward, but having clear evidence of Claire's affair would strengthen my position regarding asset division and eliminate any claims that I'd been unreasonable or controlling. The attorney had assured me that Claire's text message scheduling her affair was exactly the kind of documentation that simplified divorce proceedings, since it eliminated any ambiguity about who had initiated the breakdown of our marriage and why. Monday morning would bring a process server to Claire's workplace, adding professional humiliation to her personal crisis and ensuring that her colleagues and potential clients witnessed the legal consequences of her choices. I'd specifically requested that the divorce papers be delivered during business hours at her advertising agency, knowing that Claire's professional image would suffer when word spread through their industry about her personal drama. The woman who'd been so concerned about sophisticated appearances and maintaining the right social connections would discover how quickly professional relationships changed when people realized she'd destroyed her marriage for an affair with a coworker. Her carefully cultivated reputation as someone who understood luxury brands and high-end marketing would be undermined by the reality of her personal life becoming office gossip and potential client concern. As midnight approached and Claire's messages became increasingly desperate and incoherent, I finally turned off my phone and went to sleep in the comfortable hotel bed that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in months, I wasn't sharing space with someone who treated my presence as an inconvenience or my contributions as invisible infrastructure that simply maintained itself. The silence was peaceful rather than lonely, and I slept better than I had in weeks knowing that I'd finally taken control of a situation that had been steadily deteriorating regardless of my efforts to save it. Tomorrow would bring legal proceedings that would formalize what Claire's text message had already made clear: our marriage was over, and I was prepared to move forward with dignity rather than desperately trying to preserve something that had already been destroyed by someone who'd stopped valuing what we'd built together. The hotel room felt like freedom rather than exile, and I realized that Claire's cold efficiency in scheduling her betrayal had actually been an unexpected gift, saving me from months of false hope and wasted effort trying to win back someone who'd already mentally moved on to what she thought would be a better life with someone else. The process server found Claire at Morrison & Associates during their Monday morning client presentation, delivering divorce papers in front of her colleagues and the luxury hotel chain representatives she'd been trying to impress with her agency's innovative marketing approach. I'd specifically requested morning delivery at her workplace because I wanted Claire to experience the professional consequences of personal choices, and watching her carefully constructed image crumble in real time felt like appropriate justice for someone who'd been so concerned about sophisticated appearances and social positioning. Her colleagues had known about Derek's frequent late-night strategy sessions with Claire, and the sudden arrival of divorce papers made the nature of their relationship obvious to everyone who'd been professionally polite enough to pretend they hadn't noticed the obvious attraction between them. The client presentation became an uncomfortable disaster as Claire tried to maintain her composure while dealing with legal documents that detailed her infidelity using her own text message as evidence, and the hotel representatives quickly rescheduled their decision meeting to allow Morrison & Associates time to address their internal personnel issues. Derek's reaction to becoming the center of office gossip was predictably self-serving, as he immediately began distancing himself from Claire and claiming their relationship had been purely professional collaboration that had been misinterpreted by a jealous husband. The man who'd seemed so confident and innovative when pursuing a married woman apparently had much less enthusiasm for dealing with the professional ramifications of workplace affairs and public divorce proceedings. Claire found herself isolated at work as colleagues chose sides and management began questioning whether her personal drama was affecting her ability to serve clients who expected discretion and professionalism from their marketing partners. Within days, word had spread through Denver's advertising community about Claire's messy divorce and workplace affair, damaging her reputation in an industry where personal conduct often mattered as much as professional competence. Mutual friends who'd known both of us for years received carefully edited versions of events from Claire, but my strategic sharing of her original text message with key people in our social circle ensured that the truth was available to anyone curious enough to ask for details. The clinical efficiency of her scheduling an affair like a business meeting shocked people who'd thought they knew Claire well, and her attempts to paint herself as the victim of an unreasonable husband fell apart when confronted with documented evidence of her betrayal. Friends who'd initially offered her sympathy began distancing themselves as they realized the calculated nature of her actions and the contrast between her public persona and private behavior. Claire's attempts to fight the divorce terms became increasingly desperate as her attorney explained that her own text message had eliminated most of her legal options and that my spotless financial records made claims of misconduct impossible to pursue. She'd assumed that 8 years of marriage would entitle her to half of everything I'd built, but Colorado's equitable distribution laws considered factors like adultery and abandonment when dividing assets, especially when one spouse had contributed significantly more to the household finances. My methodical documentation of every joint account withdrawal and asset removal protected me from claims of hiding money or acting vindicatively, while her inability to afford experienced legal representation put her at a significant disadvantage during negotiations. The expensive lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to enjoying became impossible to maintain on her individual income, and the BMW lease payment alone consumed nearly a third of her monthly salary before considering rent, utilities, and the credit card debt she'd accumulated buying sophisticated clothes and accessories. The house sale became inevitable when Claire realized she couldn't afford the mortgage payments alone, and the declining Denver real estate market meant our suburban home would sell for less than we'd paid, leaving her with minimal proceeds after paying off the remaining loan balance and covering selling expenses. Derek's relationship with a 24-year-old lifestyle influencer became public on social media just as Claire was dealing with the financial reality of her divorce, adding personal humiliation to her professional and legal difficulties. The woman Derek chose as Claire's replacement was everything Claire had tried to become: naturally sophisticated, independently successful, and young enough to represent the kind of trophy relationship that enhanced rather than complicated his career aspirations. Claire's social media posts during this period revealed her growing desperation as she tried to maintain appearances while her life systematically collapsed, sharing inspirational quotes about overcoming adversity and cryptic messages about learning who your real friends were during difficult times. The cognitive dissonance between her public optimism and private reality became obvious to anyone paying attention, as her posts about embracing change and finding your authentic self contrasted sharply with the bitter comments she made about ungrateful men and manipulative coworkers during the few social gatherings she still attended. Her attempts to date other men revealed how much her confidence had been shattered by Derek's casual disposal of her and the realization that she'd destroyed her marriage for someone who'd never considered her more than a temporary diversion. The men she met through dating apps and professional networking events quickly lost interest when they learned about her recent divorce and the circumstances that had caused it, especially since Claire couldn't resist sharing bitter commentary about how marriage made men complacent and how women deserved partners who appreciated their ambition and sophistication. Her inability to take responsibility for her choices became a red flag that warned potential partners away from someone who clearly hadn't learned from her mistakes and might repeat the same destructive patterns in future relationships. The transformation from confident professional to bitter divorcee happened faster than anyone expected, and Claire's increasing isolation became self-perpetuating as her negative attitude drove away the few friends who'd initially tried to support her. She started drinking more at social events, making inappropriate comments about marriage being a trap for ambitious women and warning other wives about men who used financial dependency to control their partners. The irony that she'd been the financially dependent partner who'd exploited someone else's generosity was lost on Claire, whose revised version of our marriage cast her as the victim rather than the beneficiary of 8 years of unappreciated support. 8 months after Claire's text message destroyed our marriage, I'd purchased a modern downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows and an open layout that felt like freedom rather than the suburban compromise we'd shared for years. The space was entirely mine, decorated with furniture I'd chosen without consulting anyone else's opinion, filled with books and hobbies Claire had found tediously domestic but that brought me genuine satisfaction. My promotion to senior project manager had come with a substantial raise that made the mortgage payments comfortable, and I discovered the pleasure of spending money on things I actually wanted rather than subsidizing someone else's expensive lifestyle and ungrateful demands for constant upgrades. The construction projects I managed downtown kept me busy with meaningful work that produced tangible results, unlike the emotional labor I'd wasted trying to save a marriage with someone who'd already checked out mentally and emotionally months before scheduling her affair like a business appointment. I'd started dating Rachel 3 months earlier, after meeting her at a coffee shop where she was reading architectural journals during her lunch break from the veterinary clinic where she worked as a partner. She was 32, intelligent, financially independent, and refreshingly straightforward about her intentions and expectations in relationships. Rachel appreciated my reliability without treating it like a character flaw, understood that stability was an asset rather than a limitation, and contributed equally to our shared expenses without making it feel like a negotiation or keeping score of who owed what to whom. Our conversations covered topics beyond work and money, and she laughed at my jokes without the polite tolerance Claire had developed for humor she considered beneath her evolving sophistication. Rachel's veterinary practice required the same attention to detail and problem-solving skills that made me good at construction management, and we understood each other's professional pressures without competing or comparing career achievements like some kind of relationship scoreboard. Saturday morning at the farmer's market had become our weekly tradition, browsing vendors and planning meals together with the easy companionship of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company rather than enduring each other's presence out of obligation or convenience. Rachel insisted on splitting grocery costs and cooking responsibilities, treating our relationship like a partnership between equals rather than expecting one person to serve as the other's personal assistant and financial support system. We were discussing weekend camping plans when I spotted Claire working a promotional booth for her struggling freelance marketing business, looking smaller and more worn than I remembered from our life together just months earlier. The confident woman who'd once dismissed my conventional approach to life and relationships had been replaced by someone who looked desperate and defeated, trying too hard to impress potential clients who seemed uninterested in whatever services she was offering. Her expensive wardrobe had been replaced by business casual clothes that looked professionally appropriate but lacked the designer sophistication she'd once considered essential to her image and success. The BMW had apparently been replaced by a practical Honda that suggested financial reality had finally caught up with lifestyle expectations that had always exceeded her actual income and earning potential. Rachel noticed my attention shift and followed my gaze to Claire's booth, immediately understanding the significance without requiring explanations or emotional processing of residual feelings. She squeezed my hand gently and asked if I wanted to leave, but I found myself genuinely curious about what had become of someone who'd once been so certain that Derek represented a better future than what we'd built together. The contrast between my obvious happiness with a woman who appreciated what I offered and Claire's diminished circumstances created a moment of closure I hadn't realized I needed until it happened naturally and without drama. Claire saw me approaching her booth and her face went through a complex sequence of emotions, hope and panic, and something that looked like genuine shame as she realized how far she'd fallen from the sophisticated professional image she'd once projected with such confidence. Her attempts to appear successful and unbothered by our encounter fell flat when she realized I wasn't alone, and that Rachel represented everything Claire had thought she was too good for during our marriage, someone who valued partnership over financial dependency and contribution over entitlement. The brief conversation we had was polite and surface level, with Claire asking about my work and trying to project an image of thriving independence while obviously struggling with the reality of her reduced circumstances and social isolation. She mentioned Derek casually, as if their relationship had ended by mutual agreement rather than his abandonment when her divorce became professionally inconvenient, and claimed to be excited about building her own business instead of working for other people who didn't appreciate her innovative vision. Her forced optimism couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes or the way she kept glancing at Rachel with obvious envy and recognition that she'd destroyed something real for a fantasy that had evaporated the moment it became complicated. Rachel was gracious but distant, treating Claire with the politeness you'd show any stranger while making it clear that she wasn't threatened by or interested in engaging with my former wife's obvious attempts to create drama or tension. When Claire mentioned that she'd heard I was doing well and seemed happy, Rachel simply smiled and agreed that we were both very content with our life together, effectively ending any possibility that Claire might interpret our encounter as an opportunity for reconciliation or emotional manipulation. As we walked away from Claire's booth, I realized that seeing her again had confirmed something important about the choices I'd made and the life I was building with someone who actually deserved the effort I was willing to invest. The woman who'd once made me feel inadequate and boring had become someone I genuinely felt sorry for, not out of lingering affection but because she'd destroyed her own life chasing an illusion of sophistication and excitement that had never been real or sustainable. Rachel and I continued our morning at the farmer's market, selecting vegetables for dinner and discussing our upcoming vacation plans with the easy intimacy of people who trusted each other completely and looked forward to building something meaningful together. The encounter with Claire had been a reminder of how much better my life had become since I'd stopped trying to convince someone to want me and found someone who appreciated what I offered without needing to be persuaded or constantly reassured.